Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to another episode of the Holistic Healing with Lorrie podcast. This is for long COVID, ME/CFS, fibromyalgia, and really any chronic illness, actually. I'm your host, Lorrie Rivers, and today we're diving into a very special segment. We're going to be revisiting a Dr. Mobeen Syed during my long COVID and ME/CFS Holistic Healing Summit. Now, Dr. Bean, this is what people call him on his YouTube channel and just personally as well sometimes. He is a renowned physician and educator and has been at the forefront really of understanding and addressing a lot of the complexities of long COVID. In our conversation, Dr. Syed shares his insights on the challenges and some breakthroughs in dealing with these conditions, the importance of a holistic approach to healing, and the power of the mind-body connection. And his wisdom and expertise are truly invaluable. And I can't wait for you to hear what he has to say. This is a really great interview. So without further ado, let's dive into this enlightening segment from my conversation with Dr. Mobeen Syed at the Long COVID and ME/CFS Holistic Healing Summit. I hope you enjoy. I can't even tell you how honored I am to be here today with Dr. Mobeen Syed. And you might know him as Dr. B. From his YouTube channel, he does these incredible medical lectures. He has over 600,000 subscribers on his channel, which I don't know if that's important to him or not, but it's very impressive. And he also has over 1,400 videos. Now, his whole bio is incredible, so we're going to put the whole thing down below in the description. But I'm going to give you a little overview so you know who we're talking to here. So after graduating from King Edward Medical School in 1994 and practicing clinical medicine for a few years, he actually studied computer science with the goal of merging these new innovative technologies and healthcare, right? So he established Dr. Bean Corp, and he strives there to create a managed marketplace for medical providers that enables them to learn medicine in conjunction with new technologies. So I hope I didn't embarrass you there, Dr. Bean. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Lorrie, and thank you for the glowing resume. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So I always like to get the backstory for how people get involved with looking deeper into long COVID and subsequently also ME/CFS, since they do have so many similarities. What drew you specifically to delve deeper into long COVID?
So I mentioned this many times that nothing for COVID or long COVID was a planned thing for me. What happened was in early 2020, when the pandemic was bursting out of its seams, there was some misinformation about how to prevent the COVID infection, which made me do a lecture on YouTube to say, this is wrong. If you did, this will hurt you. And then it just became an interesting thing to just continue to do that. We are a medical lectures company, drbean.com. So I spoke with my partner and I said, we have been doing medical lectures to help improve patient outcomes. And here we are in the middle of a pandemic or early part of a pandemic. And this is our chance to help general public understand medicine as much as they can so they can protect themselves. So it is our time to put our money where our mouth is. And this might actually cause the business to be ignored for some time while we are doing these lectures. And he said, let's do this. So that was the basic start of this whole discussions or the teaching string of videos, which I call one more show every single time. So then what happened was as the COVID continued on, we started seeing long COVID or the persistent outcomes, even after vaccines as well. But of course, in the beginning, there were no vaccines, and that was SARS-CoV-2 causing long COVID. And I felt that long COVID patients were not really looked at. Doctors did not know what to do. Patients had symptoms appearing a couple of months after the COVID event. So there was very less connection with COVID. Many of this was just said as psychosomatic, or hey, this is in your head. And that is, I believe, some of the ME/CFS patients will be aware of that kind of a thing, that hey, this is just in your head. So when I saw that I thought that just like ME/CFS patients, these patients are going to be ignored as well, and we'll have a I call it a damaged population. No offense to anyone, but if we ignore long COVID, I think we'll have a scarred generation. And so that is what made me delve deeper to see, can I come back with some studies, some mechanisms, and discuss them with the audience with the hope that they or their doctors can then help knowing this information. That's the motivation.
You're getting me right here. So thank you so much for that. And the information that you put out there is so helpful, but also in a lot of ways revolutionary. So let's go through some of those things. Let's take a look, and we have a lot of questions here, and we're going to cover a lot of different topics. So if people want more specificity about any one of those topics, they can go to your YouTube channel, which we're going to put a link to, of course. Yeah. Yeah. We're going to be talking, just so that people know where we're headed, we're going to be talking about some of the new variants of COVID. We're going to talk about how to avoid them. We're going to touch on hormone disruption, because I feel like that's not talked about quite enough with these types of illnesses, brain fog and neurogenesis and sex, and how all of those relate, which is really fascinating. We're going to talk about possible causes. And we're also going to be talking about how people with long COVID, and in some cases ME/CFS, can move forward, and what your recommendations are. So you ready?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. We're doing a lot of little sprints here. Yeah. And actually, before we even started with those, how are ME/CFS and long COVID similar, and how are they different?
So the similarity is that many of the symptom sets are very similar. The fatigue, the post-exertional malaise, neurological. So it's almost the same. Myalgias, muscle pains, pains in general, the tinglings and the vibrations and fatigue that they cannot even get up from the bed and so on. So a lot of these symptoms overlap. The difference that I see is that there is definitely a difference in pathophysiology. And for the long COVID, my apologies, the pathophysiology has been evolving. I'll show you a couple of studies. On one end, Oxford came out in, I think, early 2021 and said, yeah, there is some involvement of the endocrine system, but everything is okay. Patient recovers. From there to this point now in 2023, we are seeing studies that are saying that once a long COVID occurs, it is possible that we have autoimmune antibodies that may actually become an autoimmune disease for a long period of time. The knowledge is continuing to evolve. That means what I'm saying today may become incorrect or may become evolved even tomorrow or day after when a new study is published. Having said that, there is a lot of similarities. However, long COVID has, I'm seeing in majority of the cases, a tendency to start recovering. And that I have not seen with ME/CFS that much. ME/CFS patients tend to be chronically ill and for longer period of time. Although your channels, Raylan's channel, many other channels or methods or doctors actually have been helping ME/CFS as well, the patients move back towards functional or normal, as much normal as possible state. So this is the good thing about the long COVID, that there is a possibility of recovery. I see patients recovering within a year, 2 years to a functional state, even without medications. That is not what I've seen with ME/CFS that much.
Interesting. Okay, great. Thank you. Let's talk about our new variants that are coming out now and how to avoid getting them.
Absolutely. First, the avoidance. It's a very good point. And I think that in the audience, there can be people who say there should not be a mask. It doesn't work. People who are going to say mask should be worn. So I'm going to put out the basic possibilities, and then whatever suits someone, they can do that. For me, I got I'm vaccinated. And then about a year after the vaccination, I got COVID once and then twice and then thrice within a succession of 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
And it just seemed like it's not going to leave me alone. So now the vaccine itself was not doing anything. The one infection was supposed to produce enough antibodies and enough knowledge within the body that the next infection will be prevented or will be milder. But I just did not see. It is true that the next infections were milder for me, but I still kept getting infected.
Yeah.
So I discussed with Dr. Paul Murray. I love his work. And I said, look, I just keep getting this. The only difference was for the remaining part of the pandemic, I had been always masking up. And then when the masks were not needed, I just dropped it. And now I'll go to Starbucks, have my coffee, come back with the infection. So Paul said, he said, you know what I do? I use this povidone iodine nasal spray. And when I go out, before going out, I do it. I come back and do it. And if I am sitting in a dinner or something and I think I'm exposed, I'm just going to use that. So what I did was I bought Cofix RX, which again, I have no strings attached with them. There is no commercial here. There is no money exchanging hands. That is the only one I found and I bought it. Actually, not only I found, they had sent me a letter saying, hey, we have this povidone iodine nasal spray. I think it is 1.2% iodine.
Okay.
So I started using that. And since then till now, I have never contracted COVID again, at least not to the extent of the sickness I used to get. So maybe I've been exposed again, but the viral load has been low, but I've never gotten the COVID again. So for me, and when I look on the side, your picture is here. So sometimes I just flexly, so I'm not looking away.
Thank you.
Just for your audience that they're not thinking, hey, what is it looking? For me, that was very interesting because before that, vitamin Ds and vitamin Cs and ivermectins and a bunch of other cocktail composition was done to stay protected, and then masking, and then 6 feet of the difference, and so on. There were so many things. And then came the iodine nasal spray, and I use that even now. I just traveled to FLC conference. Then this weekend, I traveled to Massachusetts and came back. Nothing happened, fingers crossed, and touch wood, nothing happened. And the only thing that I do is nasal spray. Of course, I keep my health and I try to eat healthy and I have my supplements. But this is the only thing that has really protected me. Haven't gotten any more vaccines or boosters because I thought they were not really as effective. So this is where I am. So my suggestion, if you said what one thing we should do, I would suggest that we should have iodine nasal spray. Now, for some people, iodine nasal spray and their thyroid hormone, they have to look at that. And secondly, for some other, the iodine nasal spray can cause irritation in the nose or injury in the nose. So make sure that the percentage is low. I heard someone making their own iodine nasal spray, and instead of mixing 1%, they mixed 10%. And then they had severe burning in the nose. So just be careful about it, or just buy it off the shelf from somewhere, Amazon or other places. And I think it's a very important thing. The other one request I'll make for avoidance of or protection. I did a studies analysis a few months ago where they talked about that in our anterior nasal cavities or nares, we have our immune system that makes decoy little cells. So what that means is that imagine if this is a cell here, nasal cell, what this cell does is it makes a tiny baby cell out of its own bigger self. But that baby cell is actually not a complete cell. It doesn't have a nucleus in it. It doesn't have all the functional parts of the cell. However, the external composition of this little baby cell is the same as the cell composition, surface composition of the bigger cell. So the ACE2 receptors or other receptors are all present on this tiny one. We call them, or the scientists call them, decoy cells. Now what happens is when the virus lands in our nose, our nose makes a lot of millions and millions of these decoy cells, and virus try to get into them and ends up in a jail because these cells don't have a nucleus. So they don't have any machinery for virus to use to replicate and increase in number. So the virus just gets in and is trapped in. Now, that is a very important part. This is actually a fascinating new research. That is a very important part for our protection. However, in colder times, just 8 to 10 minutes exposure to cold air kills these little baby decoy cells by 50% and reduces the capability of the cells to make more decoy cell by, I believe, 75%, which then allows the viruses to easily get hold of the original cells and cause infections. So the message is, if you live in a colder environment, or if you live in a wintry, colder environment, but you live within a environment controlled place, that means when you get out of your house or your office, there is going to be a change in temperature, which will be drastic compared to from inside to outside. That would immediately reduce the immune capability in the interior nose by 50% and 75% for two features that I discussed, which can make you vulnerable to get infection very quickly. This is especially important for ME/CFS patients or long COVID patients because with each infection, they become worse. They get a longer period of relapse. So keeping the nose warm, so maybe have a muffler around when you come out of the home
Wow.
and go into the car, or it is actually funny. I would request your audience to Google nose warmers and you will see tiny little nose warmers as well. But really, you can just have a muffler and kind of protect your nose from drastic temperature changes. And these two things have been helping me a lot.
I was just thinking it would be really funny to have a nose warmer specific.
There
And
are
then you
nose
said
warmers. There are
that.
tiny little nose warmers that they look funny. So I think I'll never wear them, but there are nose warmers.
That's okay. I have never run across that before. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I don't know that we have time to discuss it right now, but maybe because I am wondering about hydrogen peroxide inhalers instead of the iodine in case the thyroid thing or something like that.
Yeah, so that may be useful. I have not used it. I'm generally a little hesitant about hydrogen peroxide because of its capability to cause injury as well. Because of if somebody knows or the doctor knows exact correct percentages, which can go and be not injurious to the patient, then hydrogen peroxide is, of course, is a very strong antiseptic as well. Just that it can cause injury, just like iodine can cause injury. So
Okay.
be careful.
Very helpful. Thank you. Thank you. And fascinating. So let's talk about any upcoming studies or new ones that have happened that are of interest to you and that are promising, maybe.
Yes, of course, nowadays my primary focus has been to figure out what is happening in the long COVID world or even vaccine injury world. And so not exactly this study for these, but a related study that I discussed last week with my audience as well. And that bothered me. It depressed me as well, but it is important to keep an eye on it. Science is science. This is a new study. I think it came out in January of this year. And in this study, what they said was that after the SARS-CoV-2 infection, they observed, even after years, they observed the spike protein to be present in the bone marrow of the skull. Now, that was not observed before. And that has a drastic effect on the pathology and on the symptoms that we are looking at and how we are looking at those symptoms. So what the researchers found was, or let me back up for a second. We were thinking that the damage, the neurological damage or hypophyseal damage or pituitary damage, these damages were occurring because SARS-CoV-2 or the vaccine would cause inflammation of the blood-brain barriers. And from there, the infection or the virus would get into the brain and or through the olfactory nerve causing anosmia and then getting in the brain. These were the kind of researches and direction of the studies. This study has shown an alternative pathway than the blood-brain barrier. So what they said was that SARS-CoV-2 would enter the bone marrow of the skull and actually bone marrow of the other long bones as well. From this bone marrow of the skull, it will enter then the meninges and it would infect the meninges of the brain. From the meninges of the brain, then it would go to the vascular system and then cross the blood-brain barrier and enter the brain. And then they also prove that if spike protein touches the brain cells or it is interacting with the brain cells, it can cause the death of the brain cells. So this is a new pathway of injury for the brain, independent of just the blood-brain barrier. So that is something that I discussed. That is something I'm really concerned about, because there are, for example, there was a study done earlier by Oxford where they had shown that even people with mild COVID had, after a year, a global reduction in brain size. And that was concerning.
Ah,
And their thought was that this reduction in brain size occurred because the anosmia occurred in those patients who had anosmia because of the SARS-CoV-2. Then that anosmia reduced the sensory signals from the nose or the olfaction to the brain, which in turn caused olfactory system is connected to the limbic system and what is these irises, right?
oh,
They
yeah.
said that those gyruses start becoming atrophied or they function less and they start shrinking because there is not enough stimulation coming in, and that then causes the overall. Again, we know that the memory system and hippocampal system is connected throughout the brain. So then the whole brain is affected and it's not working correctly and it is shrinking in size. And all of a sudden, this study comes in and says, no, there is actually a possibility of SARS-CoV-2 spike proteins present in the bone marrow even after a year of the infection. So infection occurred, infection went away, and a year later, this spike protein is still present in the bone marrow, in the stem cells, causing damage and causing brain cell death. So this is something that is very interesting and concerning. This would prove some of the long COVID symptoms as well, and this new route. They had one sentence, the researchers, they had one sentence in this whole manuscript where they said that because it is a spike protein, it is possible that the vaccine generated spike protein will behave the same way. But they actually did all of the study on the SARS-CoV-2 infected, other than this one sentence correlating these two.
And that's all we have for you for now. I do hope that you found Dr. Bean's insights as valuable as I did. And if you do want to hear the whole interview and dive deeper into this topic and to hear more from Dr. Bean, along with 35 plus other experts, I highly recommend heading over to longcovidsummit.com, also at nsssummit.com, and you'll find the full interview with a wealth of other resources to help you on your healing journey. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who might benefit from it. And remember, your journey to healing is a journey within yourself. Keep shining your light, keep that hope, and I will see you in the next episode.